Oklahoma.
Well, first of all, let me thank my colleague from Alaska. As somebody who's been working on areas of fiscal management in our federal government for the last 6+ years, this is a one small step. Whether it saves $500 million or it saves $1 billion. The important thing is America knows we need to do this 1,500 more times. You hear a lot in the press now that with the Republican appropriators and the Republican budgeteers, the battle of how much to cut. It's the wrong language. The deficit is $1.5 trillion. This year it was 1.4 last year. We have tons of areas, like my colleague and my former colleague, the senator from Wisconsin, Russ Feingold, knows full well, where we don't effectively utilize the money that's been given to us or that we're borrowing against our kids' future. So this is a great start. We need to do this every day on every bill that comes before us. We can find it. We've identified 650 sets of duplications in the federal government. And they're not small duplications. There's 49 job training programs across 9 different agencies. There's 105 science, technology, engineering, and math programs, something the President in his State of the Union said he wanted to enhance. We don't have a metric on any of them. We already have 105 programs. We're spending $18 billion on job training. We don't know if it's working. And we don't know if the people we trained are gotten a job in the area that we trained them. So I'm excited about my colleague joining with me, and my hope is that we can set a trend. That with every bill that comes out, we'll start looking. And by the way, we do have coming from the Government Accountability Office the first third of all the government programs. When we inquired 2 years ago into the Congressional Research Service and to the Office of Management and Budget and the GAO, we said, well, give us a list of all the programs. You realize nowhere in the federal government do we have a list of all the programs where we spend money. And we're highly critical of the Defense Department because it can't pass an audit, and we rightly should be, but we can't pass an audit because we don't even know what we're doing. So this should not be controversial at all. And it should save us close to $1 billion when it's all said and done. And that's $1 billion we won't borrow from the Chinese. And all we got to do that is 1,500 more times. And the fact is we can. We're like that little engine. We can get up that hill. But what it's going to take is reaching across the aisle, like the senator from Alaska and I have, and say, here's an area of common ground. It's based in common sense, and it's something that should be done and should be done now, so that we don't. In the data, it's just to show you how silly this is. In Atlanta, there's still money for the 1996 Olympics. 14 years ago, there's $2.7 million sitting in a bank account they can't spend on it because the Olympics has already occurred, but we've still got that money out there. That's the kind of silly stuff that happens when the federal government's reaching into areas that it shouldn't be reaching into. And what we can do is we can not to lay blame, not to say it's about earmarks or not earmarks. Here's a common sense solution that says here's a way to free up $1 billion or $500 million. If it's $500 million, great. But here's a way to do that. I would also take time to spend on the floor now just to elucidate that the President's Fiscal Commission outlined $4 trillion over the next 10 years that we could eliminate, that will go a long ways towards starting to solve some of our problems. So my hope is with this amendment, we'll start a trend where we can grab hold of and capture the things that make sense, that most Americans will never miss, and if they do miss it, it's because they're going to get something better instead and more efficient instead, and we start down this road. And this is a great start. I congratulate my colleague for his initiative in bringing this back up. And what we need to do is now we need to get on the phone, get our colleagues in the House to do the same thing, and make sure when this bill goes through and this amendment's adopted, that it gets, and it actually happens. Don't forget that the Bush administration wants this to happen. So does the Obama administration. Think about the amount of labor we're spending taking care of details on things that can't get spent or won't be spent, and the amount of man hours that goes into that. And I just thought I'd finish up with one of the recommendations of the Fiscal Commission was on the federal workforce. And there's a wonderful article that was published by Ian Murray on February 3rd about how many federal employees do we have. And it's easy for us to think about the fact that when we count just true federal employees, it's 2.8 million. But that doesn't come close to the actual number of employees that the federal government has. When you add up what is actually there, and you add in postal employees, you add in military, you add in contractors, we're at 11 million federal employees. And there's a lot of areas, we have a great federal workforce, there's a lot of areas where we can be efficient and downside. We don't have to lay anybody off, we can just not add. And what we can do is through attrition markedly decrease the number of federal employees we have, which will be that second, third, and fourth $1 billion. The other thing that the commission recommended, which the Obama administration embraced, was a freeze on salaries. But most of us don't recognize we've got $3 billion owed right now to the IRS in back taxes by federal employees that's already been adjudicated. So, I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can do. So we've got lots of ideas. My pledge is to work across the aisle with our colleagues to try to find one of these every day or one of these every other day. And if we do that together, we don't have to borrow 40 cents out of every dollar that we spend in this country. We can take it down to 20 or 15 or down to 0 so that we can, in fact, ensure the future for our children. So again, I would thank my colleague. I would yield back the floor. Recognize and yield to my colleague from Alaska.
Senator from Oklahoma, I just wanted to add, I thank you for your joining on this, and I will tell you, when you look at you're right, this should be non-controversial. This should be easy. I mean, it's like if you received a check and it sits there for 10 years, I can guarantee you, if you're in a private business, as I have been, you've written that off already. It's gone. And in this situation, what we're saying is, there's $500 million, and I think you're right. It's probably, when it's all tallied up, probably closer to $1 billion sitting out there, that we did this once before with a great support on a much more narrow focus. If we did this on a regular basis, the opportunity is unlimited. And I just want to thank you. I know I've sat here in the presiding chair many times and listened to your presentations regarding the budget and areas. We may not always agree, but when we find those agreements, here's an opportunity. And I think this is an easy one in a lot of ways. There's other ones, as you know and I know, with regards to surplus property that the federal government has that's been idle or under incredible disrepair, not being utilized. From my real estate experience, I've seen this, and there is an enormous amount of resource there that could be turned right back into the private sector for future development that could actually grow the economy.
Neil, for a minute?
Absolutely.
Just to give you detail. The federal government has $90 billion worth of property it's not using right now. We're spending $9 billion a year taking care of it. And we have a budget gimmick that says an agency that needs a new building, because we're going to account for the cost of that building in the year in which they buy it and charge it all to the agency, what are we doing now? We're leasing buildings.
Right.
I guarantee you we can own them much cheaper than we can lease them. And what we should be doing is changing that and getting rid of the excess property, lowering our cost to maintain it. There's 9 out of the 1,500 we got to do right there. If we would just do that, and then change the way we purchase buildings for the federal government so that the agency can own it, instead of lease it, because it costs, over the life of the building, about twice to lease versus owning.
I will, if the Senator would yield back, I would want to say I agree. As someone who's been in the real estate business for almost 30 years, there's enormous opportunity. I mean, I know when I was mayor, we put more of the lands, and we're not talking parks and monuments, we're talking about just surplus old buildings and sites that are no longer in use, to put them back into operation, because not only will it save the federal government money in the sense of getting that surplus property off the books, but what you end up doing is turning that into economic development property for those communities, because private sector will come in, revitalize them, or use them in another means. So again, there are many ideas out there, and thank you very much for the opportunity to sponsor this with you. And as I would say at the beginning, as you said during your comments, 500 million I think is the minimum. I think it's closer probably to $1 billion just on this one idea. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.